Thank you. Thank you very much. That's far too generous of Felicity, but I'm thankful very much nonetheless. Before I do some kind of acknowledgements of my own, I want to start by setting the tone for the day with a quick poll. I arrived here and discovered my first Christmas tree of the year. Looks like it's got real apples on it, in fact. I don't know if that's the case or not. But it is an impressive beast. Put your hand up if Christmas for you is an absolute delight. What about actually Christmas is a complete nightmare? What about it doesn't really bother you either way? Put your hand up if you chose the family into which you were born. Look around. I do this work because nobody chooses the family into which they're born. And yet it is still the case in our country that the family into which you're born, its circumstances, its context, where you live in the country, the street you live in, has an unreasonably strong predictive power in terms of how well you might well do in your education, through in the entire life course, post-school, on into your adult life. And that's the reason that I do the work I do, and that's the reason I find it a great privilege to work with people like Felicity over recent years. And I'm particularly pleased because of that to be able to come here, because I've known Felicity for a while, as she said, and has been such a great companion. I always have advised, even when I was working for Offer, advising them on their national strategy, you know, if you need to know something particularly about managing partnerships effectively, about getting underneath the skin of the challenges of working in partnership so that it can be sustainable, if you need to understand something better about how to build valuable collaborations between partners who have different perspectives, if you need to understand what it truly looks like to take a student-centered approach, I was constantly battering them, saying, well, you should probably just give Felicity a ring, actually, just give Felicity a ring. So that was my constant mantra when I was speaking to anybody. And anywhere else I go in the country and get the privilege of saying these kinds of things, talking at these kinds of events, I'm constantly telling them, oh, I think you'd be interested in what's going on in Kent and Medway. So it's a real privilege to be here because I've been able to, from afar, see the fantastic work that's been going on in this part of the country. But surprisingly, this is my first time here. So thank you very much for the invitation from the partnership. Congratulations on the great work you're doing. And thank you very much for being so brave as to let me speak to you briefly. It is brave because I'm going to challenge you. Let me not spend too much time saying anything about me. In fact, how about no time at all? Your conference is called Changing Lanes. And it occurs to me that that is a fantastic analogy of the two factors, essentially, that we are concerning ourselves with when we're interested in doing something about those poor outcomes that are so dependent on the family into which you are born, the situation into which you're born. And that is that there are lanes. There are routes. There are different ways to get to the same goal, or there are routes that only go to one goal. But the point is, those lanes are to do with the system. And as professionals, in the middle of a tier from the student up to the government, we have some kind of impact on what the system looks like. We make some decisions on the courses that are available, or what's required in order to go through a particular course, or how that school is managed, or the time one takes over particular issues, and how things are addressed. Those are all the systemic things that have an impact on the lane that a young person finds themselves in, and what that lane is like, how easy a drive it is to go down that lane. But the other element of your conference is about change. And that, to me, speaks something of the choice. It speaks about the personal element. You've got the lane, which is designed by the transport system, or in our analogy, is designed by the education system, by the government, and to which we work within the strictures of and have some influence on. And then you have the choices that individuals make. Which lane am I going to travel in? And it is those choices and the factors that impact on those choices that I'm going to focus my attention on. My own work meant that I increasingly became aware and therefore committed to the need to build the capacity of individuals to manage their lives. And one of my central messages, I suppose, is about, which is another reason why it's so good to be in Kent and Medway, this significance of partnership. It is impossible to deliver young people into thriving adulthoods without working effectively in partnership. Because those individual young people are going to work and experience and be part of a vast range of different education and other organisations through their journey. Any one of us only has a small and temporary input to a young person's life. I'm not saying it can't be hugely significant, but in the grand scheme of their life, we have an opportunity. And it's bounded by the limits of our authority, what we can do, our job, and the time we've got them for. And so it is imperative that we see ourselves within the context of that bigger journey from the learner's perspective. And that's what I'm going to give my attention to. I'm going to start by telling you a little story. It's the story of two boys. I don't know if you recognize anybody here. I'm the one on the left who decided he should cut his own fringe. The one on the right, who has since had the spoon removed, is my twin brother, Tim. This was taken in about 1979. It's incidental, I suppose, but the one in the middle is my wife, Steph. We were married about a fortnight ago. Took a while, but I got there. And the reason I want to show you this is to tell you the story of two different routes, of two lanes. Now, mine was a smooth route. Some people have called it the royal route. Our education system suited me well, the way I think. The bottom line, our education system tests your ability to remember something and then be able to write it down. And I was good in my memory, and I was very good at writing things down. So I did well. I did well at school, and I found that very easy, and A-levels, and then university, and then come out and I have no idea what to do and work in admin. That's normal. And then, I know, actually, what shall I do? I'll teach. So I became a teacher. And then quickly ended up in cross-curricular programs, managing learning mentors, overseeing Aim Higher when that was running, other kind of cross-school leadership programs. And that was what I did before I ended up, as Felicity said, working full-time for Aim Higher as director in Coventry and Warwickshire. So a smooth route. My brother's was not a smooth route. My brother, in spite of his significant intelligence, did not suit the school education system. It didn't suit him. And so actually, the system that should have been serving him, serving itself, and he was one of those that suffered from it. But it's an interesting story because his route was different. He left school, actually stayed on into post-16, did what then was called a youth training scheme. Put your hand up if you remember those. Put your hand up if you've seen something similar since. He did a youth training scheme, and we've got a photo of him shaking Gary Lineker's hand, most likely to succeed, etc. He was, obviously, I love him, I adore him. He did a youth training scheme. That didn't seem to work out for him. He worked in retail at John Lewis in the sports department because he's very sporty. That didn't last very long. He trained as a physical training instructor for the police. So I'd wake up some mornings handcuffed, nothing dodgy going on there, but he would practice on me. When we were just still teenagers, late teenagers, and I'd come home and they'd be practicing on me, I'm afraid. So he did that for a while, then he did his knee in, so that had to change, and he couldn't do that anymore. He worked in a gym for a period because he was particularly, he's into those kinds of things and very fit. And he worked for a recruitment consultancy for a while, which was fine, but a bit cutthroat, and he didn't enjoy that because in spite of being this rather gruff gentleman, he is also a softie at heart. And for me, a real frustration, actually, to have someone so close to you who you love so much not experiencing, because of the system we work in, the same kinds of joys that I have from our education system. And then, when he was about 30, decided to make a change and retrained as a nurse. And now he works at the John Radcliffe Hospital in a research unit with Oxford University, where he works on some very complex stuff that I don't understand to do with genetics and heart defects, which is his area of specialism, and his area of research. So if you want to read about those genetics things, you can read the papers that he writes. It's a very interesting story with some similar outcomes for two similar children who, if you wanted to set up an experiment, you'd probably find some twins, you'd stick them in the same household, so they're born in the same family, raise them the same way, with the same parents, same experiences, all the same opportunities. And then you'd see what the education system did to them, and you'd see how their journeys were very different. And then you'd find it very interesting that then at the ripe age, in our prime, at the age of 39, they were doing very, very similar things at a very similar level, interested in research, pushing the boundaries of knowledge, caring for people in the health and the education sector, interested in people's futures. And you'd ask yourself a question about what happened in those intervening years and what role did education and educators play in what are two very, very different routes. And it's that really that interests me and why I focus my attention on understanding what it is in the individual that can make the difference so that we can take advantage of the system. I'm not speaking today about things that we cannot change, like the system, okay? I want to talk about the things that we can change, the things that we must focus on, which are those things that we can build in individuals that enable them to make the most of whatever opportunities come their way. So I've got a contention for you, and that is, if we're interested in enabling young people to make transitions into thriving adulthoods, then when we're thinking about alternative routes into education, we mustn't fall into the trap of prescribing for young people what those routes are, and, as you can see, prescribing what the goal is. For me, I've become convinced that it was just an arrogance in myself that caused me to tell the young person what the best route was for them and what the goal was. The system defines the goal. It says your goal is to get this number of GCSEs by this age and then to do this by this point. In fact, the government's goal, try not to be too cynical in this Christmassy period, is economic productivity. If we've done our jobs according to the government, somebody gets out there and economically productive, woohoo, we can all celebrate. Whereas I'm interested in something more for young people. I want them to become thriving adults. And actually, as a result of that, we must equip them to be able to make sense of their journey, to be able to make effective choices that meet their desires and their talents, and not be trapped by leading them down the paths that we think are possible, that we think are the right ones, to a goal that's been defined by somebody outside who has a very limited vision of what it means to be a human being. Just a quick note about the comparison between the apparent dichotomy between vocational and academic routes. I do some work with the International Centre for Guidance Studies, which I know you know, I think, because I read some very interesting work about the Kent model of careers you were telling me about earlier. Tristram Hooley from ISEGS came. And I was there recently looking at some very interesting research that was talking about higher apprentices and higher apprenticeships. Don't know if you have much experience of them in Kent and Medway. There's not many of them about. But anyway, they are an obvious and alternative route to higher education for certain sectors. But very interesting that when you talk to employers, those at the end of a learner's journey, that what you discover is that half of employers are finding that they can't get the employees that they want. Even though they are already recruiting from apprenticeship backgrounds and graduate backgrounds. They are not concerned about whether the person was a graduate, whether they were an apprentice or not. They've got a different mindset, and that is about the bottom line. They want people who are effective. And the same factors address both those from academic backgrounds, those from vocational backgrounds, in terms of what their interests are. They were saying that actually the problem they have with graduates is that they overestimate their potential and their ability. It's very, very interesting research to see what employers think about what makes a successful, educated person. They recruit graduates and they do it for a good reason because they come with expertise in particular areas. That's good. So they make bottom line decisions, but they still see that the self-perceptions of graduates can be a limiting factor that they have to address. But it's also the case that when they looked at apprentices, what they value hugely is that they are what they called local and loyal. For the bottom line of an employer, they want to know that somebody that they invest in is going to stick around, is going to have some investment in the future of their company. So that was just really interesting because it's made a note to me about, as I was saying, not prescribing for people what we think the best route into an outcome that will meet their needs is. It's a bit of an aside. What I want to tell you actually about now, and I'm going to race through some data just to make a particular point. the National Strategy for Access and Student Success is one of the things I helped contribute to when I was working for Offer. And it tells a story, or more importantly, actually, it doesn't tell a story. I'm telling a story which is in the strategy, which isn't told. And it goes like this. Once upon a time, there was some good news. And that good news was that over the course of a decade or more, I don't know, surprisingly starting around 2004 in particular when the Aim Higher program began, there was huge improvement in the progression into higher education from those groups who were the most disadvantaged. This red line represents the bottom fifth in terms of disadvantage using the polar 3 thing. If you're not aware of that and you want to know, by all means talk. But it's those people who come from the areas where they're least likely to go into higher education. So isn't that fantastic? A wonderful, almost 43% increase. Isn't that good news? Reason to celebrate. That's fantastic. No, unfortunately, it's not so good news necessarily. It is good news for those people, but actually what this tells you is that if you look at the increased progression rates for all the other groups going into higher education as well, they've improved just as much, in fact, slightly more. It's a negligible amount. Essentially, we've improved progression into higher education over a long period of time for people from disadvantaged backgrounds, but not in relation to those who are more privileged than them. That point about where the family you're born into. So we haven't narrowed the gap. Now, this is the most recent data they've published in this whole set. This has been updated. There are some slight improvements. The story is largely still the same. The gap is unacceptably wide. We know that. Well, let's not beat ourselves around the bush. Let's just say, great, we got them into higher education. I'm afraid the story goes on. When you get into higher education, same groups, red one is the most disadvantaged, you're almost twice as likely to drop out in the first year if you're from a disadvantaged background. So you're 3 times less likely to get in the first place. Woo, if you make it, you're twice as likely to drop out. It doesn't end there, I'm afraid. When you've completed, I should say if you complete your degree, the same thing is true here. These are sector-adjusted averages. You can read a lot about what that actually means if you like. Basically, the middle line is what you'd expect as an average. If you're below, you're worse than average. If you're above, you're higher. Quintile 1 here, that is that most disadvantaged group. So for all of these factors here, they are well below the average. They're less likely to get a degree. They're less likely for that degree to be a first or a 2-1. If they get a degree, they're less likely to be employed 6 months after. And if they got a degree as well and are employed, that job is less likely to be a graduate job. The question it raises for me is, what is going on? What's going on that means that, dependent on the context from which you come, your background, where you live, the family you grew up in, it's affecting your likelihood to get into higher education. Okay, it's about attainment, surely. Well, it affects your retention, you're likely to stay. Well, surely that's about attainment. This is the government's line. Surely that's about attainment. Whether or not you get your degree, well, that's definitely about attainment. Surely it affects you at that stage as well. You're less likely to get into a job and it's less likely to be a graduate job. Something is happening at every single stage of somebody's life course based on where they've come from. And it starts really, really early. This is data I've pulled together from a range of different government first releases, statistical first releases. They have indicators of deprivation where they use the free school meals measure to compare to everybody else because they're trying to keep an eye on how we're doing in terms of narrowing the gap. And we're not doing very well. It just says that in this first one here, if you're working at the early years and foundation stage, I don't suppose that's anybody here, I don't think, but you'll have some awareness of it. Teachers make a judgment, has this pupil made a good level of development, okay? And you can see in the purpley bar there, free school meals worse than those in the green. And the grey bit is the difference. You stick that grey bit on top of the purple bit and they're the same. Do you see? That's the difference. The key thing here is that at early years and foundation stage, then at level 4, age 11, then at GCSE level, the gap grows and grows and grows. In fact, there's been plenty of research to demonstrate that something happens very, very early on in life that actually sets almost a trajectory that's very difficult to break out of. I don't want to go into the pre-birth factors that have an impact on your likely outcomes. And that's why the truth of the accident of birth, as we call it, not choosing where you're born, has such an impact. That somehow early on something goes on and I'm pretty sure it's not about attainment when you're talking about 2-year-olds, that something goes on that has a huge impact and increases the gap over time. And what that something is, as far as I'm concerned, is something other than what is the focus of our curriculum on a daily basis. And it is the socio-emotional skills, the non-cognitive factors in a person, the intrinsic things that affect their likelihood to succeed at every single stage of their journey. I've pulled together a summary here from work done in the University of Chicago by Professor Heckman. He's an economist, so genuinely interested in about how this affects countries' economies. And this is a reasonable summary if you wanted a quick shot at it. All the research tells us, yeah, we know ability makes a big difference. You know, how skilled you are, it makes a huge difference. Let's not kid ourselves. We are doing the right thing. If we're teaching, if we're equipping, we're doing the right thing. Literacy and numeracy are going to be fundamental skills in whatever you're doing, okay? But now, a much wider body of research shows us that it matters equally what a range of other abilities are, the level of other abilities, which I'm going to tell you something about. Socio-emotional factors have equal predictive power of a range of factors that, I mean, this is what upsets me so much, is to do with educational outcome, kind of obvious, employment, likelihood of being involved in crime, health, how long you will live. We're not talking about a third world country, we're talking about our country. All of those things, strong predictive powers, socio-emotional factors. We know from what I've just shown you and lots of other research as well, the gaps open up really, really early. Gaps of as much as 2 years by the time you're 4 and you start an early years in terms of cognitive development. We know also, though, that early investment, as in government systems, the things that we do can have a huge impact on that, okay? This is not a lost cause, that's the message. And this is kind of like the trajectory I'm on. Oh, no, it's really bad news, don't worry, it's okay, it's hopeful, and I'll end up there, okay? I promise. Early investment does make a difference. What we do, what our colleagues in early years do, makes a huge difference, and they can narrow the gap of learners that come from different backgrounds. They can narrow the gap, and it has a big impact. But if you don't follow it up, then that impact is lost. Sounds a bit like parenting to me. You can't just say, great, you're 10, you can speak, you can feed yourself, off you go. That's not how it works. And the reason it doesn't work that way is because the personality skills, the socio-emotional factors that I'm going to uncover a little, are malleable through the adolescent phase. I'm assuming most people here are in the secondary phase, is that right? Yeah, okay. Well, you know this. You see it every single day. You see the turmoil that goes on in a teenager, and what you are looking at is the development that goes on in the prefrontal cortex of their brain, which controls socio-emotional factors, emotions, self-perception, how I see myself in comparison to other people. All those kinds of factors are what's going on in young people that you are serving. And the good news is that it's malleable at this stage, because in spite of that cognitive development that goes on, do you know IQ is ranked stable by the about age of 10? You're not going to improve somebody's IQ in comparison to somebody else after 10 or 11. Cognitive development in that sense is kind of like, it's flat. What you can do is do something about their socio-emotional factors. They've done lots of the cognitive development. The brain is working exceptionally well. What they need to know is, how does that work when they become an adolescent and they're starting to make choices? They start to understand I'm an individual and I relate to other individuals, and how I'm seen by other individuals has an impact on my future. That's when all that turmoil goes on. But it can be changed because the prefrontal cortex is developing in that adolescent phase. So we have a job to do to make sure it develops in the way we want, in the same way that we have a job to do when we're in the home and we read to our 2-year-old. In the same way we have a job to do in the primary school when we're teaching the basics of literacy and numeracy. Same job, different focus. And the result is, as well, and this is not surprising to anyone, I'm sure, like you in education, this is not an and/or, as is the debate at the moment, which says, well, you've got this academic stuff and we need to do that, but we also need to do some stuff about character, okay, which is what goes on in the debate at the moment. It's not about that. Actually, it's the socio-emotional factors that underpin the development of these academic things. This makes sense to you if you look in the classroom. This is saying that the person here who has low self-worth That is the reason they throw the chair and won't engage in learning. It is not difficult to understand that somebody with high self-worth concern, as psychologists would call it, doesn't take the risk to ask a question in class or do their best in a piece of work because it threatens their self-worth if then that work is seen to be a failure in the exam system that we have. That makes sense. Which of you would spend time and invest in something now in your adult lives that you didn't see a good chance of success in and wasn't going to deliver you a return in terms of your happiness or your well-being? You wouldn't do it. None of us would do that. But something about our system asks a number of students to do that every day. That's why his conclusion was simply that the most effective adolescent interventions you can deliver are the ones that focus on the emotional skills. When I was working in school in Bristol that serves the Southmead estate, it's a complex place, very, very significant challenges. I was managing a range of programs, and I was trying to make sense of this. And my degree was theology and philosophy, so I just can't help thinking, I'm afraid. And so I started to ask myself, what is it that is going on, and how do I make sense of it? Because it's not good enough that I've got this range of kids who are on all these different lists of priorities, and somehow they're just lists. They're not about people and their needs. Something's going on underneath the surface, and I tried to find out what, and I came to a conclusion. It was this. And I hope you're not bored, because some of you will have heard this many, many times. The conclusion is simply this, that if you want progression, there are only three things that make the difference. Progression is the sum of three determinants, three things that determine progression. Aspiration, plus awareness, plus attainment equals progression. And I want to challenge you to think of yourself as a progression professional, not an attainment professional. When I've lobbied in policy terms, I've said I want us to see schools empowered, enabled, encouraged, supported to be progression organisations, not what Ofsted sees them as, which is an attainment organisation. Because we know from all the research that the attainment focus does not deliver progression into a thriving adulthood, and that's what those data show. It doesn't work. If you look at it from a learner's perspective, all we're trying to say is that when I look at this young person, I want you to be able to say with confidence that I want to, and I know how to, and I am able to, so I will. That's what I want. That's for me going to define that this young person, I've done them a great service, and they are entering their adult life with confidence about what is possible and their ability to achieve it. We did a bit of research which told us something about how complex this is. I'm not going to go into that, but essentially you'll see this every day. It's no surprise to you that actually, as I've shown, aspirations have a huge impact on awareness and on attainment. Those people who have constant experiences, reinforcing experiences of positive outcomes, feel better about themselves, has an impact on their willingness to engage in learning, etc. So it's surprising that they have a very complex relationship. They're foundational factors. They lay a foundation, as I've said. The socio-emotional factors underpin everything else that we're trying to succeed on, okay? They're opportunistic. These are the factors which I'm saying are the ones that enable the individual to take the best of whatever opportunities they have. The opportunities we can't predict, the future that we're not sure what it looks like, we can focus on the things that will enable them to make the best of it. It's malleable. We can do something about these things. It's not a lost cause. This is good news. The thing we can do most about are these things. And they're lifelong. They're the factors that have an impact on learners lifelong. I haven't got time to go into detail, and I'd love to help you out if I can at another point in doing this. But we're working on a project at the moment funded by the Paul Hamlin Foundation, developing a curriculum for progression. And we're looking at developing what the underpinning factors are that deliver those three determinants. Same as you come in here today. I'm going to make some assumptions. You came here today because you wanted to. So you had some drive to get here. No doubt, given what you've said about the traffic, some of you had to overcome some challenges to get here as well. You had to have done some planning. You might have had to show some resilience. But certainly, you chose to be here. And secondly, you had the awareness. You had to make some choices about what route you were going to take. You knew the goal that you wanted, and you had some choices to make. Planning, timing, when will I go, what time's the bus, who do I have to pick up, when do the kids need to go to school, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. They're not skills you're born with, okay? And all those attainment skills that go with that. And what we've done is to review the international research from a range of sources, psychology and neurology, as well as socioeconomy and all sorts of places, to try to understand them. What are the factors? Don't take this as a rule. This is our best guess at the moment, and it's something we work on all the time. And that's why we're working with Paul Hamlin to develop a curriculum for how you develop these things. And we're doing it at the moment in the context of Key Stage 2 to Key Stage 3 transition, and we'll complete that next year. But these are the conclusions we've come to. A range of factors that underpin it. And it makes sense to you. And I've got to say, if I said nothing else, if you don't know you're valuable and you don't value yourself, which of the rest of these are you ever going to develop in? For me, if we can do one thing for somebody, it would be to enable them to say with confidence that I know I'm valuable and I value myself. I'll tell you what, I'll send you this and you can send it out to people. That awareness is about essentially me, the journey, and the world I'm in. It's exactly what you're doing in your Federation of Schools over there. Building the capacity of individuals to understand the options they've got, to make good choices, to see where there is help and go and get it. Do you know as well, the people with the low self-esteem are the ones that don't ask for help. The ones that need help don't ask for help because asking for help is a threat, if you've experienced that before, identifying my weaknesses. That's what asking for help is. We need to come up with another way to describe what that is. We need to show that everybody needs help. Head teachers need to be to say, I need help with this. We need to model what it looks like positively to ask for help. And there are a range of skills that underpin them. You recognize them as functional skills or key skills, depending on how long you've been around. The effects of disadvantage are felt very, very early. And the gaps open up early, and the gaps grow over time. The impact of disadvantage grows because there are those gatekeeper effects. You don't get to this stage if you haven't got to this stage by then. And also because of those foundations that are laid. If the foundations aren't laid, then the house can't be built as high. The socio-emotional life course factors, the ones that matter over time, can be developed if we start to think of ourselves as professionals who progress, whose goal is progression. So we must move, even in the language perhaps of widening participation, which is happening in the national strategy and language since, talking about the student life cycle, which I don't like because it's oriented around the idea that it's a cycle for students, which it's not. They just have one journey. We need to move from participation. Participation is not a successful outcome in itself unless they arrive there ready to thrive. So the challenge to us in access is get somebody into university ready to thrive, not by the skin of their teeth, okay? And if we want them to thrive, it is not about just knowing how to go about writing an essay in an academic style. Those are skills that are not necessary in that way prior to that. That's a skill you can learn at the time. What you can't deliver just at the last minute is somebody's self-esteem to a sufficient degree that they will engage in self-directed learning. That we can do much, much earlier, and they will arrive ready to thrive.